He said he'd sleep on the floor. I said that was fine. But when the lights went out, the silence between us got louder than anything I've ever heard. My name is Vanessa. I'm 44. I'm married. Quietly. Cleanly. Predictably. There are no storms in our house. No drama. Just lists, receipts, and soft goodnights. My husband and I function like two lines in a spreadsheet, parallel, purposeful, never intersecting. Sometimes I think we've built the perfect life. So perfect, there's no room left in it for breathing. It started on a Thursday. A nothing kind of day. My husband was leaving for a conference in Atlanta. He fussed over his suitcase for an hour, muttering about shirts and a tie that wouldn't iron flat. I found his shoes under the bed, packed a travel-size mouthwash without being asked. We moved like a well-rehearsed play. Exit lines, a peck on the cheek, the sound of the front door clicking shut. And then silence. That kind of silence you only hear in a house that's too used to being filled. I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup of tea I hadn't touched, watching steam fade. The kettle had long since gone quiet. The refrigerator hummed like a throat trying not to speak. I turned on the radio, low volume, just to hear something breathing back. Around 7, my phone buzzed. Jenna, old friend. Always mid-chaos. Hey, are you home tonight? I said yes. My son got stranded, Eli. Train delays. Hotels are packed. Some convention in town. Could he crash with you for the night? Just one night. He's got a blanket and everything. Eli. I remembered him from years ago. He used to come around with headphones in, barely speaking. Polite, distant, always fiddling with a screen. He couldn't have been older than 17 then. I didn't even hesitate. Of course, I said. Tell him to come by. He arrived an hour later. The streetlights were already on. Rain, thin and aimless, tapped at the porch railing. When I opened the door, he was standing there with a rolled blanket under one arm and a dark backpack slung over one shoulder. Hi, he said. His voice caught me off guard. Deeper. Slower. Measured. Come in, I said. He stepped out of the rain, left his shoes by the door, shook off his coat. The house seemed to shift slightly as he entered, like it adjusted around him. Not uncomfortably. Just differently. Where should I set up? He asked. We have a pull-out sofa, but if you really want floor authenticity, I can give you that too. He gave a small smile. I'll take the floor. Promise. You say that like it's a line. He shrugged. Just want to be clear. We sat in the kitchen for a while. I made tea. He chose honey. No milk. Drank it slow, like he needed the warmth more than the taste. We didn't talk much. A few casual updates, his job, design, something with user interfaces, my neighborhood, same as ever, a bit of mutual memory sharing. At one point I asked, do you like what you do? He glanced at me sideways. Do you know anyone who actually likes anything anymore? And I didn't know what to say. By 10, we were both pretending to be sleepy. I gave him a pillow, a bottle of water, an extra throw blanket. He laid everything out in the guest room on the floor, as promised. I stood by the doorway, watching how carefully he moved. No clutter, no noise. He thanked me. I nodded. A beat of silence. Good night, I said. You too. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, suddenly aware of my own footsteps on the hardwood. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes open, sheets too stiff against my skin. The heater kicked on, then off, then on again. Outside, the rain had turned to mist, barely brushing the windows. I didn't hear anything from the guest room. Not a cough, not a creak, not a shift of fabric. Just his breath. Not loud, not strange. Just there. Regular. Steady. Like a clock tick you can't unhear once you've noticed it. I turned onto my side, away from the door. Pulled the blanket up higher. Still, my skin felt bare. It wasn't what he did. It wasn't what I felt. It was what neither of us said. What filled the room between us like vapor. We didn't cross a line. We didn't say a word. But something sat beside us in that house. And both of us were pretending not to see it. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of two people in separate rooms breathing the same air too loudly. And a silence that grew warmer than it should have. I gave him a pillow, a cup of water, turned out the light. The house fell silent, except for his breath. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the mug he'd used for tea. The water was hot, too hot. My hands flushed pink under the stream, but I didn't turn it down. I held the mug carefully, fingers resting against the smooth ceramic like it was something fragile. Sacred. His fingerprints might still be there. Of course, that's ridiculous. But my hands moved more carefully than they needed to. In the living room, I heard the soft rustle of fabric, him unfolding the blanket. Not rushed, not careless. Each motion deliberate, like he didn't want to disturb the shape of the room. He didn't ask where the lights were. Didn't ask for anything at all. I dried the mug and set it back in the cupboard. Then I stood for a moment, staring at nothing. Just the tiled backsplash and my own reflection in the darkened window. My face looked unfamiliar, like someone watching me from the other side. Someone older. Someone alert. Not afraid. Not exactly, but aware. Of herself. In a way I hadn't been in a very long time. I walked into the living room with the pillow and a glass of water. He was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, barefoot. His shoes were by the door, his bag tucked neatly beside the couch. The blanket was already spread across the rug, folded once at the edge. He looked up as I entered. Slow, unhurried. I brought you this, I said. He took the glass with both hands. Thanks. He said it gently. He said everything gently. I handed him the pillow. His fingers brushed mine. Just barely. It shouldn't have meant anything. But my hand stayed empty longer than necessary after I let go. He settled in, leaned the pillow against the wall, and exhaled slowly. Not loudly, but enough that I heard it. Something in me contracted. I usually fall asleep fast, he said. Hope I don't keep you up. I shook my head. You won't. He smiled. Not wide. Not for show. Just something quiet. Private. I'll turn off the lights, then, I said. He nodded once. I walked to the wall switch, paused, glanced back at him. He was already adjusting the blanket around his legs. Bare feet stretched out. His back resting against the baseboard. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful. The lights clicked off. The house went dark. Not completely. The streetlights outside sent soft shadows across the floor. A faint glow slipped through the window blinds and cut faint lines across the room. I stood there for a second too long, letting my eyes adjust. Then I turned and walked down the hallway. My bedroom felt colder than it had 20 minutes earlier. Not because the temperature had changed, because now I knew there was someone else breathing in the house. Not a stranger, but not familiar either. Something in between. And the space between those two definitions was suddenly enormous. I undressed in the dark. Slower than usual. More quietly. As if I didn't want him to hear the whisper of fabric. As if I thought he might be listening. Not because he would be, but because I was. To myself. To everything. I pulled a long-sleeved shirt over my head. Soft cotton. Nothing that clung. I slipped beneath the covers and lay on my back. Eyes open. The ceiling looked like it always had, cracked slightly in the far left corner. I'd meant to call someone about that. Never did. The crack had grown. Or maybe I'd just finally noticed it properly. Then I heard him. Just a breath. Soft. Regular. Human. I could hear it even through the wall. Or maybe I imagined that part. But it was there. Subtle. Steady. Like a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. It didn't lull me. It haunted me. I shifted under the blankets, turned onto my side, then back. My feet were too warm, my arms too cold. I adjusted the pillow. Once, twice. Still, his breath. Still, that slow pulse in the house that didn't belong to the heater or the wind. I started tracing thoughts, memories, trying to occupy my mind. I thought of a vacation we took years ago. The hotel in Maine. The ocean loud outside our window. My husband asleep beside me while I lay awake listening to the waves. I realized I'd felt the same way then, too. Alone. While someone else was right beside me. I tried counting backwards from 100. Didn't even reach 90 before I felt it again. That pull. That thread between rooms. Between breaths. Between silences. Not sexual. Not even emotional. Something more elemental than that. A recognition. Like my body remembered something before my mind did. At one point, I sat up. Just sat there. The clock read 1:27 a.m. I pressed the back of my hand to my cheek. It was warm. I got up, walked quietly to the bathroom, ran the faucet, just to hear a different kind of sound. Just to break the tension. I didn't need water. I just needed noise. When I returned to bed, I didn't lie down immediately. I stood by the window, looked out. Street empty. Lights dull. The kind of hour that feels unreal. Behind me, down the hall, he was still there. Still breathing. And I realized with some quiet horror that I could tell the difference between the rhythm of my husband's breath and Eli's. I could feel the shape of it. I could feel how it affected mine. I got into bed again. Slowly. This time I lay on my stomach. A position I rarely used. My cheek against the cool pillow. Eyes closed. But I wasn't asleep. Not even close. I wasn't even drifting. I was awake in a way that made every nerve speak. Every nerve, wait. I imagined opening the door. Not walking out. Just opening it. Just letting the air move. Letting him know I was awake too. I imagined him looking up. Saying nothing. I imagined what it would feel like to sit on the floor beside him. Just sit. Say nothing. Lean back against the same wall. Feel the carpet on my legs. Let the quiet be a language. One we both understood. I didn't open the door. But I wasn't proud of that. I wasn't relieved either. At some point, I must have closed my eyes. And maybe I slept. But when I woke, the clock said 3:12. And everything inside me knew. I hadn't slept at all. I pulled the covers up again. Tight under my chin. My body curled. My jaw locked. Still, I heard it. His breath. Not loud, but close. So close. Like it knew how to find me even through walls. That's when I understood. Nothing was going to happen. Nothing would happen. But that wasn't the part one couldn't bear. It was the knowledge that something had already begun. Without touch. Without invitation. It had already entered me. Silently. Deeply. And now I didn't know how to sleep through it. Or forget it. Or live beside it. The silence didn't ask me for anything. It just stayed. Like a hand resting somewhere it shouldn't. But never moving. Never leaving. At 2:12 a.m., I opened my eyes. No reason. Just awake. I heard him shift on the floor. Felt it, more than heard it. Like the air moved differently. 2:12 a.m. That's what the clock said when I opened my eyes, though I hadn't truly been asleep. It was more like I'd been suspended, adrift beneath the surface of something just shy of dreaming. A soft kind of forgetting where the body rests, but the mind still walks the edges of itself. And yet, the moment I opened my eyes, everything inside me lit up with sharp presence. My pulse, my breath, my awareness. The world was silent. Still. But something in me said, not alone. At first I thought maybe it was nothing. A trick of restlessness. A ghost of a thought. But then I heard it, no, felt it, a slight shift in the air, as if the molecules around me had rearranged themselves. As if someone had moved, just a little, just enough to be known. A breath that wasn't mine. A pause that wasn't empty. I lay still, listening. Then I sat up. Slowly. The blanket slipped down my arms. My skin prickled, not with cold, but with something more ancient, more aware. The house was quiet, the way a held breath is quiet, not peace, but suspension. I turned toward the door. It was open. Just an inch. Maybe two. And I knew, with that strange inner certainty that speaks before logic, that I hadn't left it that way. I always closed it. Always. Especially with someone else in the house. Especially with him. Especially tonight. There was no sound. No footsteps. No creaking floorboards. Just the steady hum of the world holding itself still. But through that sliver of open space, the hallway poured in with faint light. Not enough to see clearly. Just enough to make the darkness aware of itself. And in that darkness, he was there. Eli. Not standing. Not moving. Just lying on the floor where he'd made his bed. Head resting on the pillow I'd given him. Blanket pulled to his chest. Eyes wide open. And watching me. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I didn't pull the covers up like a shield. Because the moment our eyes met, nothing about it felt dangerous. It just felt known. Like I had been waiting to be seen without realizing it. Like my body had opened the door long before I noticed my hand hadn't. His gaze wasn't invasive. It wasn't searching. It didn't ask for anything. But it didn't look away either. It just was. We stared at each other in the dark. Neither of us moved. The space between us pulsed like a live wire. I could feel every inch of it, that hallway, the air, the quiet tension stitched between our breaths. I wasn't scared. I wasn't ashamed. I was alert. Alive. Like something inside me had just sat up. And maybe it had. Maybe the version of me I'd buried under years of quiet and careful had just opened her eyes for the first time in years. Maybe that's why I couldn't look away. Because she was watching too. He didn't say a word. He didn't gesture. He didn't break the silence. But in that quiet, something unfolded between us, not lust, not tension, not temptation. Recognition. Of what? I'm not sure. Of how lonely we both were. Of how close the floor was to my bed. Of how near we'd come to crossing something neither of us had named. Of the way his presence filled more than the room. It filled something in me that had been hollow for so long I'd stopped noticing the echo. I think that was the moment I understood the kind of closeness that doesn't need touch. The kind that lives in shared silence. The kind that changes nothing and yet everything. Time didn't pass. It suspended. Seconds. Minutes. Maybe a lifetime. He watched me. I watched him. And then, slowly, gently, he closed his eyes. Not in rejection. Not in fear. Just a return. To stillness. To the line. To the safety of almost. I lay back down. But I didn't sleep. My heart was still beating too loudly in my chest. My fingers curled in the sheets like they were trying to hold onto something they couldn't name. I stared at the ceiling. It felt farther away than it had before. Everything felt farther. Except him. I thought about the door. About that crack of space that changed everything. He hadn't pushed it open. Not really. Maybe it had drifted. Maybe I had left it that way. But we both knew better. It opened when the silence needed more room to speak. And we let it. I remembered the way his voice sounded hours earlier when we sat in the kitchen. Low. Measured. as if he was always listening more than he spoke. I wondered what he was thinking now. If he was replaying the shape of my face in the dark. If he knew how still I had gone. If he had imagined something different when he laid down on my floor. If I had too. Nothing had happened. Not one rule broken. Not 1 inch crossed. But I already knew this would follow me. I already knew I would walk differently in my own house after this. That I would pass by the spot on the rug where he lay and remember how it felt to be held by someone's eyes and not collapse. That I would fold the blanket with trembling hands. That I would wash the pillowcase and pause halfway through, unable to drop it into the machine. We hadn't touched, but my body remembered him anyway, not like a lover, like a mirror. And in it, I saw someone I didn't know I missed. By the time the light began to rise, faint and apologetic through the curtains, I was still awake. And he was still there, breathing evenly, eyes closed, as if the night hadn't just rewritten something between us. But it had, and we would never speak of it, because there was nothing to say, because everything had already been said in silence, and answered, in mine. By morning, he was gone. Left a thank you note on the table. Folded blanket. Washed mug. Perfect guest. I woke to silence. But not the same kind. This silence wasn't full. It wasn't watching me. It wasn't breathing in the next room. It was hollow. I knew before I sat up. Before I even opened my eyes fully. He was gone. The space felt different, emptier than before he arrived. As if somehow his leaving took more than his body with it. As if it took the echo of something that had never been said aloud. I walked into the living room barefoot. The blanket was folded neatly on the edge of the couch. The pillow was upright, its imprint smoothed out. The glass I'd given him was washed and resting upside down on the drying rack. And on the kitchen table, a note. Nothing elaborate. Just, thank you. Didn't want to wake you. Made coffee before I left. Hope that's okay. The coffee was still warm. I poured a cup and sat at the table, robe wrapped around me, hair unbrushed. I didn't drink it at first. I just held it. The mug was warm in my palms. Too warm for a goodbye. But that's what it was. Even though nothing had happened. And that was the part one couldn't get over. That nothing had happened. Not a touch. Not a word. Not a step forward. But now the floor where he'd slept felt sacred. The space he'd occupied carried an imprint, like a pressed page where ink had never been. Later that afternoon, my husband called. He sounded cheerful. Tired from meetings, but light. He asked how I slept. Fine, I said. But my voice caught on the first syllable. Like it had to hurdle something just to make it out of my throat. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and let it pass. That night, I set the table for one. Not because I needed to. Just because I wasn't ready for two. The house felt smaller. Brighter, somehow. As if the absence of what didn't happen cast a different kind of light. I went to bed early. Pulled the covers up to my chin. Closed the door all the way. But the silence didn't leave. It stayed. And not like before. Not like when it hovered between two people afraid to move. This silence settled in the walls. It had weight now. It had memory. And I couldn't tell if I was mourning what hadn't happened, or cherishing it. Maybe both. Weeks passed. I washed the pillowcase. Washed the blanket. Put everything back in the closet. But not before I held the fabric to my face. Not to smell him. Not really. Just to see if the moment would come back. It didn't. But something else did. A sense of stillness. Of being outside the lines for a moment and surviving it. Not ruined. Not broken. Changed. He never called. I didn't expect him to. We had made a choice, silently and together, to preserve it in that form. Whatever it was. Untouched. But not forgotten. Never forgotten. I still think about the way he looked at me that night. From the floor. Not with longing, with knowing. Like he'd read something in me and chose not to write his name over it. And I think that was the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. I go on. The days fold over each other. I cook. I clean. I answer emails. I listen to my husband talk about his day. We laugh. Sometimes we even hold hands while watching TV. From the outside, nothing is missing. But I know better. There is a room inside me that was unlocked. A door I didn't open with my hands. And I live in that room now, quietly. From time to time. Just to remember who I was that one night. When nothing happened. And everything changed.